Does political insistence that Afrikaans is not an indigenous language hinder transformation and reconciliation in SA? Some argue that it's the language of the oppressor, while activists point out it was appropriated by the apartheid government and belongs to all who speak it. Let's find out what Jan Hofmeyr, head of research and policy at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, thinks. Jan, thank you so much for your time. Afrikaans, still such a hot potato topic and still dividing people 27 years after democracy. Is there any way that it will stop being seen as the oppressor's language in the eyes of many people?
Yes, well, as you have indeed said, it remains a contested issue. As we know, Afrikaans was used as a medium for oppression during the apartheid years, but also, as we know, many people who suffered the consequences of apartheid, the victims of apartheid, was also Afrikaans, and the struggle was also conducted by many in Afrikaans. So it is really sort of a question of how we view history. So I think one thing that one needs to bear in mind, this is Afrikaans is the third most spoken language in South Africa, and by not regarding it as an indigenous language, one does risk the possibility that many people who speak the language might feel sort of alienated. And if we look at South Africa as a long-term nation-building project, I think we have to avoid sort of instances where language gets used as a means to exclude. And the discussion over the past week largely relates to the Constitutional Court ruling that was made in the case of the language policy of UNISA, where Judge Majid also sort of indicated that Afrikaans also has its roots in a variety of communities in South Africa, and that it does regard it as an indigenous language. Last week, the member of the Human Rights Commission, advocate Andre Gam, also indicated to your colleague Dan Moyani that they will also reach out to the minister of higher education, also to amend the language policy framework for public higher education institutions, also to include Afrikaans sort of in that policy paper as an indigenous language. I think the important thing that one has to take also out from this ruling is that it's not only the fact that the court sort of ordered UNISA to reinstate Afrikaans, but that Judge Majid also indicated that it is important that this ruling is seen as also indicating that all languages in South Africa has got equal status, and therefore Afrikaans has had a privileged status during apartheid, and that speakers should also now accept and recognize that it is a language that is equal to all those others that are spoken in South Africa.
Jan, what steps should have been taken or can still be taken to illuminate the fascinating and really rich history of Afrikaans and not just align it to its apartheid history?
I think it's a question of public communication. It's a question of also exposing South Africans to the cultures of each other, and I think that the education system, our education system, has a very important role to play in that regard. But I think it's also a responsibility of politicians in South Africa to consider the language that they use, if I may put it in that way, when it comes to issues of inclusion and exclusion, and consider how the phrasing affects the way that communities are being seen in South Africa. The contention is around the language policy framework, and that we also know that the DA wrote to the minister in the past week about that. But I think the bigger picture, and I think it's something that the DA also has to illuminate, is that other languages have suffered as at an expense of Afrikaans during apartheid, especially as it comes to use of academic language. And hence there is also a need to reinstate those languages, or also elevate them to scientific languages.
Jan, thank you so much. That's a very good point. It's also about elevating other languages. I appreciate your time. Jan Hofmeyr, Head of Research and Policy at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation.